Steam curled from beneath the BMW's hood like dying breath on Interstate 75. Jessica Barnes watched her career evaporate with each second that ticked toward the most crucial presentation of her life. 45 minutes for roadside assistance, 20 minutes until professional death. Her manicured fingers trembled against the leather steering wheel as desperation crept through her pressed business suit. Then gravel crunched behind her. Salvation arrived in the form of a sun-bleached pickup truck that wheezed to a stop. The man who stepped out moved with the unhurried grace of someone who had wrestled victory from countless mechanical graves. Calloused hands, knowing eyes, a toolbox worn smooth by 10,000 repairs. He studied her smoking engine like a doctor reading symptoms, then offered something no corporate warrior had ever heard on a highway. "Just need that sandwich there, ma'am. We'll call it even." Aye. In that moment, neither knew they were negotiating the most transformative business deal in modern history. The stranger's name was Blake Thompson, though Jessica wouldn't learn this until later. All she knew was that his weathered hands moved beneath her hood with surgical precision, while she paced behind him in designer heels that clicked against asphalt like a nervous metronome. The morning sun caught the silver in his dark hair as he worked, and she noticed the way his shoulders remained steady despite the urgency radiating from her every gesture. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues wondering where she was, but she couldn't tear her attention away from this man who treated her mechanical crisis like a puzzle worth solving rather than an inconvenience worth avoiding. "Alternator belt," he said without looking up, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who spoke in certainties rather than possibilities. The words meant nothing to her, but the way he said them meant everything. Jessica watched him produce a replacement part from his truck with the casual ease of a magician pulling scarves from thin air. His movements were economical, purposeful, as if he had performed this exact repair in countless driveways and parking lots across the state. The smell of motor oil mixed with the lingering scent of his coffee, creating an oddly comforting atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the chaos she felt inside. 23 minutes later, her BMW purged to life with a sound that might as well have been angels singing. Jessica's knees nearly buckled with relief as she realized she could still make her presentation, could still save the promotion that represented 3 years of 18-hour days and sacrificed weekends. She fumbled for her purse, desperate to compensate this mechanical messiah who had appeared from nowhere to rescue her career. But when she pulled out her wallet, Blake Thompson simply shook his head and pointed to the turkey sandwich sitting forgotten on her passenger seat. "That'll do just fine," he said, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen more action than most people's entire wardrobes. Jessica stared at the sandwich, a simple turkey and Swiss on sourdough that she had grabbed from a deli without thinking, the kind of mundane lunch that cost maybe $8 and usually ended up half-eaten in her office trash can. It seemed absurd, almost insulting, to offer such a trivial payment for what felt like a miracle. But something in Blake's expression suggested he was serious, and something in her desperation suggested she shouldn't argue with Providence. The exchange happened in seconds. Sandwich for salvation, bread and meat for career resurrection. Jessica tried to press cash into his palm anyway, but Blake Thompson had already closed his toolbox and was walking back to his truck with the unhurried gait of a man who had solved his share of problems for the day. She wanted to call after him, to get his contact information, to somehow properly thank this guardian angel in work boots. Instead, she found herself standing beside her purring BMW, watching his tail lights disappear into traffic, while holding a business card he had somehow slipped onto her dashboard when she wasn't looking. Her presentation that afternoon was flawless. Jessica Barnes delivered the performance of her career, securing a promotion that would elevate her from senior manager to director of human resources at TechFlow Industries. Her colleagues attributed her unusual confidence to preparation and ambition, but Jessica knew better. Every time she felt her nerves threatening to overwhelm her, she thought of Blake Thompson's steady hands working beneath her hood, the way he had approached her crisis with calm competence instead of the frantic energy that seemed to infect everyone else in her professional world. She had been saved by a stranger who wanted nothing more than her lunch, and that knowledge filled her with a strange sense of possibility. But success brought unexpected guilt. That evening, alone in her downtown apartment overlooking the city lights, Jessica couldn't shake the image of Blake's worn work clothes and sun-weathered skin. She had accepted his help with the grateful desperation of someone drowning, but now that she could think clearly, the inequality of their exchange gnawed at her conscience. A sandwich for saving her career. It felt like paying a surgeon with pocket change, like compensating a lifeguard with a thank you card. The business card he had left contained only a name, Thompson Auto Services, and an address in a part of town she rarely visited. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams of smoking engines and steady hands. Jessica found herself wondering about the man who had materialized at exactly the right moment with exactly the right skills. Was this what he did for a living? How many other stranded motorists had he rescued with nothing more than tool competence and quiet kindness? The questions multiplied in the darkness, and by dawn she had made a decision that would have surprised her 24 hours earlier. She was going to find Blake Thompson and properly thank him for what he had done. The address on his business card led to a neighborhood where prosperity was measured in small increments rather than stock options and corner offices. Jessica's BMW felt conspicuous among the modest homes and aging vehicles, like a diamond ring in a hardware store. Thompson Auto Services occupied a converted garage behind a small house with a yard that showed signs of careful maintenance despite its humble materials. Wind chimes made from old car parts dangled from the eaves, creating a gentle percussion that seemed to welcome visitors with mechanical music. Blake Thompson emerged from beneath the hood of an ancient Chevrolet when he heard her car door slam. And for a moment, Jessica saw recognition flicker in his eyes before settling into polite curiosity. He wiped his hands on the same rag he had used the day before, or perhaps one identical to it, and approached her with the measured pace of someone who had learned not to rush toward potential complications. The morning light revealed details she had missed in her previous desperation. The crow's feet around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into engine compartments, the precise way he organized his tools, the small photo taped to his workbench that showed a young girl with his same steady gaze. "Mrs. Barnes," he said, and she realized he had read her name from the business cards scattered across her dashboard during yesterday's rescue. His tone carried no judgment, but also no particular warmth, the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to be cautious around people from different worlds. Jessica suddenly felt overdressed in her tailored suit, like an actress who had wandered onto the wrong movie set still wearing her costume from a completely different production. The gulf between their circumstances seemed wider in daylight than it had on the emergency-lit highway. "I wanted to thank you properly," she began. But Blake Thompson was already shaking his head with the same gentle firmness he had shown when refusing her money the day before. His refusal felt different this morning, though, less about the specific payment and more about maintaining some invisible boundary between their separate universes. Jessica pressed on anyway, explaining about her promotion, about the career-defining presentation he had made possible, about the guilt that had kept her awake, wondering how to properly compensate someone who had quite literally saved her professional life. Blake listened with the patient attention of a man accustomed to diagnosis problems, but when she finished speaking, he simply returned to his work beneath the Chevrolet's hood. "You don't owe me anything more than that sandwich," he said, his voice slightly muffled by the engine compartment. The dismissal stung, not because it was rude. Blake Thompson seemed incapable of genuine rudeness, but because it felt like a door closing before she had fully explained why she was knocking. Jessica found herself studying his modest operation, noting the careful organization, the quality of his tool collection, the way even his workspace seemed to reflect the same quiet competence she had witnessed on the highway. It was then that she noticed the engineering textbooks. They sat on a shelf between motor oil containers and spare parts catalogues, their spines worn from use, but their content clearly advanced. Differential equations, thermodynamics, systems analysis. Books that belonged in university libraries or corporate research departments, not in converted garage workshops in working-class neighborhoods. Jessica's trained eye for talent, honed by years of hiring and evaluating employees, began to detect inconsistencies in Blake Thompson's story that demanded explanation. "Those are interesting reading materials for a mechanic," she said carefully, nodding towards the bookshelf. Blake's hands stilled beneath the hood for just a moment, so briefly that someone less observant might have missed it entirely. When he straightened to look at her, Jessica saw something new in his expression, a wariness that suggested she had accidentally stumbled into territory he preferred to keep private. The morning suddenly felt charged with unspoken questions and carefully guarded answers. "Sometimes you need to understand the theory behind the practice," Blake said finally, but his tone had shifted into something more guarded, more careful. Jessica sensed she was approaching the edge of whatever boundary he had established around his personal history, but her professional instincts were fully engaged now. She had built her career on reading people, on detecting talent that others overlooked, and everything about Blake Thompson suggested depths that his current circumstances didn't fully explain. The quality of his diagnostic skills, the precision of his repairs, the advanced textbooks. They painted a picture of someone who had perhaps once operated in very different professional circles. "What did you do before this?" she asked directly, abandoning the careful politeness that had characterized their conversation until now. Blake Thompson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and he turned back to the engine with deliberate focus. For a moment, Jessica thought he might refuse to answer entirely, might retreat behind the same quiet courtesy that had deflected her gratitude moments earlier. But something in the quality of the silence suggested internal struggle rather than simple dismissal. "I was an engineer," he said eventually, the words emerging like a confession he hadn't planned to make. "Software systems. Worked for a company that developed diagnostic programs for automotive manufacturers. Thought I was going to change the world with algorithms and predictive maintenance protocols. His laugh carried no humor, only the bitter recognition of dreams that had been forcibly abandoned. Jessica felt puzzle pieces clicking into place, explaining the textbooks, the diagnostic expertise, the way he approached mechanical problems with systematic precision rather than intuitive guesswork. The story emerged in fragments, extracted piece by piece like a complicated engine repair. Blake had been a rising star at a tech company, designing the kind of software that made modern vehicles smarter and more efficient. Marriage to his college sweetheart. A daughter named Emma, who inherited his curiosity about how things worked. Then cancer arrived like a mechanical failure that no amount of engineering knowledge could diagnose or repair. Medical bills that insurance didn't fully cover. A wife who fought bravely but lost anyway. A daughter who needed stability more than she needed a father pursuing professional ambitions. Had to choose between keeping the corporate job with its travel and overtime, or being present for Emma. Blake said, his hands moving continuously as he spoke, as if mechanical work helped him process painful memories. Wasn't really a choice at all. Started doing repairs part-time while Sarah was sick. Discovered I was good at it. Discovered it paid better than I expected. After she died, I made it full-time. Emma needed a father who was actually there, not one who was always flying to client meetings or debugging systems at 3 a.m. Jessica absorbed this information with the growing certainty that she had stumbled upon something unprecedented in her professional experience. Here was a man who had voluntarily stepped away from a lucrative career to prioritize family responsibilities, who had successfully transitioned from digital systems to mechanical repairs, who had built a modest but apparently sustainable business from nothing. The kind of adaptability and practical intelligence that corporations spent millions trying to identify and recruit, and he was currently working from a converted garage, fixing aging vehicles for customers who probably paid him a fraction of what his skills were actually worth. "What company?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Blake's reluctance to respond confirmed her suspicions even before he spoke. When he finally named his former employer, a technology firm that had been acquired by TechFlow Industries 3 years earlier, Jessica felt the familiar electric thrill of discovering an opportunity that others had missed entirely. This wasn't just about gratitude anymore. This was about recognizing talent that had been hidden by circumstances rather than lacking in ability. The conversation that followed felt like the most important interview Jessica had ever conducted, though she doubted Blake Thompson realized he was being evaluated. She asked careful questions about his engineering background, his transition to mechanical work, his long-term goals for his small business. His answers revealed a mind that had remained sharp, despite its change in focus. Someone who thought systematically about problems and solutions, who had successfully reinvented himself without losing the analytical skills that had made him valuable in his previous career. But it was his discussion of Emma that truly captured Jessica's attention. The way Blake's expression softened when he mentioned his daughter, the pride in his voice when he described her academic achievements, the careful balance he had struck between providing for her material needs and being emotionally present in her daily life. These weren't the priorities of someone who had failed in his previous career. They were the values of someone who had succeeded in ways that couldn't be measured by salary or job title. Jessica found herself wondering if TechFlow Industries had ever employed anyone with Blake Thompson's combination of technical expertise and personal integrity. How would you feel about returning to engineering work? She asked finally, the question emerging before she had fully thought through its implications. Blake straightened abruptly, his expression shifting from cautious openness to something approaching alarm. For a moment, Jessica worried she had pushed too hard, too fast, that she had violated the careful boundaries he had established around his current life. The silence stretched between them like a wire drawn taut, and she could almost see him calculating the risks and benefits of whatever opportunity she might be suggesting. "Depends on the terms," he said eventually, but his tone carried the wariness of someone who had learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. Jessica understood his caution. In her experience, people who had been forced to make difficult sacrifices often became protective of the stability they had managed to create from those sacrifices. Blake Thompson had built a life that worked for him and his daughter, and she was essentially proposing that he consider dismantling it in favor of something uncertain, even if potentially more lucrative. Flexible schedule, remote work options, understanding that your daughter comes first, Jessica heard herself saying, though she had no authority to make such commitments on behalf of tech-flow industries. But her mind was already racing ahead, imagining how she could present Blake Thompson's case to the executive team, how she could frame his unique background as exactly the kind of practical experience their engineering department needed. Someone who understood both the theoretical frameworks and the real-world applications, who had actually worked with his hands on the systems he had once designed digitally. Blake's laugh came out rusty, as if he hadn't used it in a while. "You don't even know if I'm any good at what I used to do," he pointed out, but Jessica could hear something different in his voice now. Not quite hope, but perhaps the first stirring of possibility. She realized that in all their conversation, he hadn't once claimed to miss his former career or expressed regret about his current circumstances. This wasn't a man wallowing in self-pity about paths not taken. This was someone who had made peace with his choices, but might be willing to reconsider them under the right conditions. "I know you diagnosed my car problem in 30 seconds and fixed it in 20 minutes with parts you happen to have in your truck," Jessica replied. "I know you read advanced engineering texts for fun and organized your workspace like someone who thinks systematically about efficiency and workflow. I know you built a successful business from scratch while raising a daughter alone. That tells me everything I need to know about whether you're good at what you do." The compliments seemed to make Blake uncomfortable, as if he wasn't accustomed to having his competence acknowledged by people outside his immediate circle of customers and neighbors. He returned to his work on the Chevrolet, but Jessica could see him processing what she had said, weighing it against whatever internal calculations governed his decision-making. The morning was warming up, and she could hear the sounds of the neighborhood coming to life around them, children calling to each other, screen doors opening and closing, the distant hum of traffic from the main road. "What exactly are you proposing?" Blake asked finally, and Jessica realized she had reached the moment where vague possibility needed to become concrete offer. The problem was that she didn't actually have the authority to hire him, didn't know if tech-flow industries would be interested in someone with his unconventional background, didn't even know if the kind of flexible arrangement he would need was something the company could accommodate. She was operating on instinct and intuition, driven by the certainty that Blake Thompson represented exactly the kind of overlooked talent that smart companies spent fortunes trying to identify. "Let me talk to some people," she said, pulling out one of her business cards and writing her direct number on the back. Give me a week to see what I can arrange. No promises, but I think there might be an opportunity that could work for both of us. Blake accepted the card with the same careful neutrality he had shown throughout their conversation. But Jessica caught him glancing at her title, Director of Human Resources, with something that might have been surprise or recognition or both. As she drove away from Thompson Auto Services, Jessica found herself already composing the arguments she would need to make to TechFlow's executive team. She would need to be strategic about how she presented Blake Thompson's case, emphasizing his technical expertise and practical experience while carefully framing his current circumstances as evidence of adaptability rather than career failure. The corporate world didn't always appreciate people who had chosen family responsibility over professional advancement, but Jessica had spent enough time in hiring meetings to know how to translate unconventional backgrounds into compelling candidate narratives. The following week passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and careful negotiations. Jessica discovered that TechFlow Industries was indeed struggling with exactly the kind of problems that Blake Thompson's background had prepared him to solve. Their engineering teams were brilliant at theoretical design, but often lacked practical experience with how their systems actually performed in real-world conditions. Several recent projects had failed, not because of faulty concepts, but because of implementation details that looked good on paper, but proved problematic in practice. More importantly, the company had recently committed to a new initiative focused on predictive maintenance and diagnostic systems for commercial vehicles, exactly the area where Blake had specialized before leaving his corporate career. The timing was almost suspiciously perfect, as if the universe had conspired to create circumstances where his unique combination of skills would be not just useful, but essential. Jessica began to believe that her highway rescue had been more than coincidence. It had been the kind of serendipitous encounter that changed trajectories in ways neither party could have anticipated. The executive team's initial reaction to Blake Thompson's profile was predictably mixed. His technical credentials were impressive, but his 3-year absence from corporate engineering raised questions about whether his skills had remained current. His transition to mechanical work was seen by some as evidence of adaptability and by others as possible indication that he had been unable to compete at the highest levels of his profession. Most concerning to several executives was his explicit requirement that family obligations take priority over work demands, a condition that challenged traditional expectations about professional dedication. But Jessica had anticipated these objections and prepared accordingly. She emphasized Blake's successful entrepreneurship, his ability to build a profitable business from nothing, his practical understanding of the systems their company designed. She positioned his parental responsibilities not as limitations, but as evidence of the kind of maturity and reliability that made for stable, long-term employees. Most persuasively, she arranged for him to participate in a technical consultation on a current project, an opportunity for him to demonstrate his capabilities rather than simply describe them. The consultation was a revelation. Blake Thompson approached TechFlow's diagnostic system challenges with a perspective that none of their current engineers possessed. Where they saw elegant algorithms and sophisticated data analysis, he saw practical implementation problems and real-world usage scenarios. His questions revealed gaps in their assumptions that had been invisible to people who had never actually crawled under a vehicle to install the systems they were designing. Within 2 hours, he had identified 3 critical issues that would have caused expensive failures if the current design had been deployed without modification. When was the last time any of you actually used one of these diagnostic tools in a working repair shop? Blake asked during the meeting, his tone curious rather than critical. The silence that followed provided its own answer. Jessica watched the executive team's expressions shift from skepticism to attention to something approaching excitement as they began to grasp what Blake Thompson could bring to their development process. Here was someone who could bridge the gap between theoretical design and practical application, who could anticipate problems before they became expensive mistakes. The job offer that emerged from these discussions exceeded even Jessica's optimistic expectations. Senior consulting engineer with flexible scheduling, remote work options, and explicit acknowledgement that family responsibilities would be accommodated rather than merely tolerated. The salary was substantial enough to provide financial security, while the consulting structure allowed Blake to maintain his automotive repair business if he chose. Most importantly, the role was designed around his unique expertise, rather than forcing him into a conventional position that might recreate the work-life conflicts that had driven him away from corporate employment initially. Blake's response to the offer was characteristically measured. He requested time to consider the proposal, to discuss it with his daughter, to evaluate how it might affect the life they had built together. Jessica respected his caution, even as she hoped for his acceptance, understanding that this decision represented more than a simple career change. It was about whether he was willing to trust that this opportunity would be different from whatever had driven him away from engineering work 3 years earlier. The answer came on a Friday afternoon, delivered in person at Jessica's office. Blake Thompson appeared in her doorway, wearing clothes she had never seen him in. Pressed khakis and a button-down shirt that transformed him from the capable mechanic she had first encountered into someone who looked entirely comfortable in corporate surroundings. The transformation was startling, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time, recognizing the professional persona that had been hidden beneath work clothes and grease stains. "I'd like to accept your offer," he said simply. But Jessica could see the decision had been anything but simple. There was nervousness in his posture, excitement in his expression, and something else, a quality of relief that suggested he had been carrying a burden she was only beginning to understand. This wasn't just about returning to engineering work. It was about reclaiming a part of himself that he had set aside but never fully abandoned. The textbooks in his garage, the systematic approach to mechanical problems, the way he had effortlessly navigated the technical consultation, all evidence that Blake Thompson had remained an engineer, even while working as a mechanic. The paperwork was completed with surprising efficiency, as if the corporate machinery had been waiting for exactly this moment to demonstrate its capacity for accommodation and flexibility. Blake would start the following month, beginning with a project that would allow him to work primarily from home, while gradually transitioning into more collaborative responsibilities. The arrangement felt experimental in the best possible way, an acknowledgement that valuable employees sometimes required unconventional accommodations. But the most significant moment came not in Jessica's office or in any corporate conference room, but in the parking lot outside Thompson Auto Services on Blake's last day as a full-time mechanic. Jessica had come to witness his transition, to mark the completion of what felt like the most personally meaningful hiring decision of her career. She found him cleaning his tools with the same methodical care she had observed during their first encounter. But now the ritual carried the weight of conclusion rather than routine maintenance. Emma's excited about the change. Blake said as he packed away wrenches that had supported his family through the most difficult period of their lives. Says she's proud that her dad is going to be an engineer again, but mostly she's happy that I'll be home more regularly. His daughter had been present for the decision-making process. Jessica learned, treated as a partner in evaluating how this opportunity might affect their family dynamic. The inclusion of a 9-year-old in career planning decisions struck Jessica as both unusual and entirely appropriate for someone who had reorganized his entire professional life around parental responsibilities. "What about you?" Jessica asked. "How do you feel about the change?" Blake paused in his packing, considering the question with the same careful attention he brought to mechanical diagnoses. When he answered, his response revealed depths of sacrifice and hope that Jessica had only begun to appreciate during their previous conversations. "I feel like I'm getting a second chance to be good at something I loved," he said finally. "But I also feel grateful that I got to spend these years learning how the systems I used to design actually work in practice. I'm a better engineer now because I've been a mechanic. That wouldn't have happened if everything had gone according to my original plan." The perspective showed a maturity that impressed Jessica even more than his technical capabilities. The ability to find value and meaning in unexpected detours rather than simply enduring them as temporary setbacks. 6 months later, Blake Thompson had become one of TechFlow Industries' most valuable consulting engineers, leading a team focused on bridging the gap between design theory and practical implementation. His insights had improved the reliability of their diagnostic systems while reducing manufacturing costs and installation complexity. More importantly, his approach to work-life integration had begun to influence company culture, demonstrating that professional excellence and personal responsibility could coexist when organizational structures were designed to accommodate rather than compete with family obligations. Jessica often thought about the chain of circumstances that had brought them together. Her mechanical emergency, his willingness to help, the sandwich that had seemed so inadequate as payment for services rendered. What had appeared to be a simple roadside assistance had become a case study in recognizing and recruiting overlooked talent. Proof that valuable employees sometimes emerged from unexpected places and unconventional backgrounds. The turkey sandwich had indeed proven to be the most transformative business deal in modern corporate history, though neither participant had understood its true value at the time of the original transaction. The story might have ended there, with Blake successfully reintegrated into engineering work, and Jessica satisfied with her role in facilitating his career restoration. But the most significant developments were yet to come, emerging from the deeper connections and mutual respect that had developed through their professional collaboration. What had begun as gratitude for roadside assistance had evolved into recognition of shared values and complementary strengths, the foundation for a partnership that would extend far beyond the boundaries of conventional employer-employee relationships. Blake's transformation had been remarkable, but Jessica's evolution was equally significant. Working with someone who had voluntarily prioritized family responsibility over professional advancement had forced her to examine her own assumptions about success and sacrifice. She began to question whether the corporate culture that rewarded unlimited availability and single-minded career focus actually produced better results than Blake's more balanced approach to professional excellence. His example suggested that depth of experience and clarity of priorities might be more valuable than simple dedication to climbing organizational hierarchies. Their collaboration on the predictive maintenance project had revealed complementary expertise that made both of them more effective than either could have been independently. Jessica's understanding of corporate systems and organizational psychology, combined with Blake's technical expertise and practical experience, to create solutions that satisfied both engineering requirements and business objectives. They had become professional partners in the truest sense, each contributing unique perspectives that enhanced the other's capabilities. But it was Emma Thompson who provided the catalyst for the next phase of their relationship. Blake's daughter had thrived during his transition back to engineering work, benefiting from both the financial stability and the increased schedule predictability that his new position provided. She had also developed a friendship with Jessica, who had become a frequent presence in their lives through work-related dinners and weekend project sessions. Emma's easy acceptance of Jessica as part of their extended family had surprised all three participants, creating bonds that transcended professional boundaries. "She asks about you when you're not around," Blake mentioned one evening as they finished reviewing technical specifications for a new diagnostic protocol. They were working late at his house, Emma asleep upstairs, the kitchen table covered with printouts and laptop computers. The domestic setting had become natural for their collaboration, more conducive to creative problem-solving than sterile corporate conference rooms. Jessica had grown comfortable in their home, appreciating the warmth and stability that Blake had created for his daughter despite the challenges they had navigated together. The admission surprised Jessica, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Emma was approaching 10 years old enough to understand that the relationship between her father and Jessica had developed beyond simple professional cooperation. Blake had been careful not to assume anything about Jessica's interest in their family life, but Emma's question suggested she had observed dynamics that the adults had been reluctant to acknowledge explicitly. Children often perceived emotional connections that grown-ups rationalized away in the name of maintaining appropriate boundaries. "What kind of questions?" Jessica asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Emma was an intelligent child who had learned to read people and situations with the accuracy that often developed in young people who had experienced significant loss and adaptation. She had undoubtedly noticed the easy communication between her father and Jessica, the shared laughter over inside jokes, the comfortable silences that suggested deep familiarity rather than mere professional courtesy. "Whether you might want to stick around permanently," Blake said, his tone carefully neutral, but his eyes watching Jessica's reaction with obvious interest. "She says she's never seen me smile as much as I do when you're here, and she wonders if that means we might become a real family instead of just work partners who eat dinner together sometimes." The directness of Emma's observation cut through all the careful professional distance that Jessica and Blake had maintained around their growing personal connection. The conversation that followed was long overdue, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been developing parallel to their professional collaboration. Jessica realized that somewhere between gratitude for roadside assistance and admiration for Blake's engineering expertise, she had begun to care about him and Emma in ways that had nothing to do with work objectives or corporate success. Blake's quiet confidence, his dedication to his daughter, his ability to find meaning and purpose in whatever circumstances life presented, these qualities had attracted her attention initially as professional assets, but had become personally compelling over months of close collaboration. "I've been wondering the same thing," Jessica admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I've never been around a family like yours, never seen someone balance personal and professional responsibilities the way you do, It makes me want to be part of something like that instead of just observing it from the outside. The admission felt both terrifying and liberating, an acknowledgement of desires she had barely allowed herself to recognize consciously. What emerged from that conversation was not a dramatic declaration of love or immediate decision to merge their lives, but rather a careful exploration of whether their professional partnership might expand into something more comprehensive and permanent. Both Blake and Jessica had learned to be cautious about major life changes, to consider implications and consequences rather than simply following impulses. But Emma's questions had provided the catalyst for honest discussion about possibilities they had both been contemplating privately. The transition from colleagues to family happened gradually, marked by small changes rather than dramatic gestures. Jessica began spending more time at Blake's house, not for work purposes, but simply because she enjoyed their company and they seemed to enjoy hers. Emma started referring to Jessica as her bonus mum, a term that captured the supportive but non-threatening role she played in the child's life. Blake discovered that sharing parental responsibilities with someone who understood and respected his priorities made him a more relaxed and effective father. Their wedding, when it finally occurred 18 months after that first highway encounter, was a small ceremony attended primarily by Emma and a few close colleagues from TechFlow Industries. The reception featured a cake decorated with automotive tools and engineering diagrams, an acknowledgement of the unconventional circumstances that had brought them together. Blake's toast thanked Jessica for seeing potential in a broken-down mechanic, while Jessica's response credited him with teaching her that the most valuable discoveries often came disguised as simple acts of kindness. Emma's speech, delivered with the poise of someone twice her age, brought tears to most of the assembled guests. Jessica taught me that families can grow in unexpected ways, she said, and my dad taught me that sometimes the best things happen when you help someone without expecting anything in return except maybe a sandwich. The observation drew laughter from everyone who knew their origin story, but also captured something essential about how seemingly minor decisions could cascade into life-changing consequences. 5 years after their highway encounter, Jessica and Blake Thompson had become one of TechFlow Industries' most innovative teams, developing diagnostic systems that set new standards for reliability and user-friendliness. Their success was attributed to the unique combination of theoretical expertise and practical experience that Blake brought to engineering challenges, enhanced by Jessica's understanding of how to translate technical innovation into business value. But their professional achievements were overshadowed by the family they had created together, a demonstration that personal happiness and career success could reinforce rather than compete with each other. Emma Thompson, now 15 and already displaying aptitude for both engineering and business management, often accompanied her parents to industry conferences and technical presentations. She had grown up understanding that work could be meaningful rather than merely necessary, that professional excellence emerged from passion and purpose rather than simple ambition. Her presence at corporate events served as a reminder that the most important innovations often came from people who maintained connections to life outside conference rooms and quarterly reports. The sandwich that had started it all had long since been consumed and forgotten, but its symbolic value had grown over time. Blake and Jessica established a corporate mentorship program focused on helping technically skilled individuals navigate career transitions and work-life balance challenges. They called it the Second Chances Initiative, acknowledging that valuable contributions often came from people who had taken unconventional paths or faced unexpected obstacles. The program had helped dozens of engineers, mechanics, and other technically skilled professionals find opportunities that accommodated their complete lives rather than demanding exclusive loyalty to professional advancement. But perhaps the most significant legacy of their highway encounter was the proof it provided that meaningful connections could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. Jessica's mechanical emergency had revealed Blake's hidden capabilities, but more importantly, it had demonstrated that people willing to help strangers without expectation of reward often possessed exactly the qualities that made for exceptional colleagues, partners, and family members. The turkey sandwich had been inadequate payment for automotive repair, but perfectly adequate foundation for a relationship built on mutual respect, shared values, and recognition that the most valuable exchanges couldn't be measured in conventional currency. Their story had become legendary within tech flow industries, cited as evidence that innovative hiring practices and flexible work arrangements could produce extraordinary results. But Jessica and Blake understood that their success had less to do with corporate policies than with their willingness to recognize potential in unexpected places and forms. The breakdown that had seemed like disaster had actually been opportunity in disguise, proof that life's most significant developments often arrived unannounced and required both courage and wisdom to fully appreciate. Years later, when Emma Thompson graduated from engineering school and joined her parents' company as a junior consultant, she would often tell interviewers that her family story proved that small acts of kindness could have consequences far beyond anyone's imagination. "My dad saved a stranger's career with automotive repair skills," she would explain, "and that stranger saved his career by recognizing abilities he had forgotten he possessed. They both got more than they bargained for, but that's what happens when people are willing to help each other without calculating the exact value of the exchange." The turkey sandwich had indeed been the most transformative business deal in modern history, though its value hadn't been apparent until years after the original transaction. Sometimes the most significant investments were measured not in dollars or stock options, but in willingness to trust that human connections could transcend the boundaries of professional relationships and conventional expectations. Blake and Jessica Thompson had learned that lesson on a highway, where mechanical failure had become the foundation for personal and professional success that neither could have achieved independently. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that opportunities for transformation often came disguised as ordinary moments, requiring nothing more than sandwich and willingness to help a stranger in need.